Hello and thank you for watching this video. My name is Damon Rosen and I work for an educational group called The United West that focuses on national security and counterterrorism. And today is going to be the first installment of a series of videos that I'm going to be producing having to do with the refugee influx that we are witnessing, particularly in Western Europe. And it's something that I am calling a hijra, or an offensive immigration done by Muslims to spread Islam. That being said, today's guest does not share my point of view of this being necessarily an offensive hijra, but she does have a very interesting theory on what creates the refugees themselves, and that is something that you could see over my shoulder, and that's called the country unsafety theory. Again, the country unsafety, and essentially our guest will explain that, but she's saying that it is the situations created by the governments in these countries that create the refugee problem itself. Now, our guest today's name is Yoella Wells. She lives in the Netherlands, and she is a remarkable woman. Not just beautiful, but brilliant. I'm going to have to read this because her bio is so long, I can't remember it. So, she has 2 master's degrees, one in clinical and health psychology and neuropsychology, and also in forensic psychiatry. She has worked with refugees for over 10 years. She has worked with the European Astronaut Center on studies. And she is an absolutely lovely, compassionate woman that has a unique insight into the refugee issue because she actually works with some of these people. And another interesting aspect of Yoella Wells is her affinity for the great state of Israel. And with that, I would like to go ahead and bring on today's guest, Yoella Wells. Yoella, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. And as I introduced earlier, the subject for today is the worldwide refugee crisis and phenomenon. And I say worldwide because it is. What's been showing up in the news most predominantly has obviously been what's going on in Europe, which is where you live, in the Netherlands, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But you have a much different view of the refugee resettlement that is going on. Not so much a negative view. You're actually looking to change perceptions in some way. And it's really, you look at the refugee problem in a very unique way, and you look at it in something that you call the unsafe country principle. Please go ahead and tell the viewers a little bit about the unsafe country philosophy that you have written about.
Yeah, well, I work with refugees already for a very long time. And I noticed, that the countries, from Africa, from North Korea, etc., there are many individuals that are coming, and they all have their own, refugee escape route, and they have their own suffering, etc. Those are all individuals. It's different when it's become a large group, when there is a war, like in Somalia or now in Syria. And but people, they are fleeing because a country is unsafe. And I think we should measure by the unsafety of a country and not, by just amount of people that are leaving, because like, the WHO also say, there are a lot of people that are inside the country, moving around. It's about 51 million. It's really a lot.
You're saying there are 51 million people on the move this year?
Exactly.
Not over the last 10 years. You're saying this year. It's a lot of people.
Just, people keep on moving. And that is 15 million It was, I think it's a bit more now. I think it was last year, it was 50 million. I think now it's about 53 or 54 in the last numbers.
And so what you're saying, you're saying it's not necessarily just the numbers of people, it's why they're moving is they're fleeing unsafe conditions, not just for the sake of moving. It's actually their physical safety that they're fearing, and maybe not just some minor human rights issues or economic. You're saying there's maybe not as many economic refugees as there are that are just literally in fear of their lives. Is that what the unsafe country philosophy is saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the definition of a refugee, it always has to be with the safety, the psychological, physical safety. And, and you can also imagine that people are not just leaving their hometown, there must be really something going on, to take your children to go up. Like I said, a lot of people of Iraq, before they left the country, they really moved around from the south to the north, etc. And also in Afghanistan, people do not just leave their country. Really something must be going on. And if you look at the unsafety of a country, and if I have the definition, it means that their government or the country is failing, to give any protection of safety to an individual. This is actually what the unsafety is of a country. And if you see, let's say, the list that's coming out from WH or the UNRWA or whatever, you can see, it's a high amount. It's really a high amount. Mm-hmm. And the unsafety also makes that people do strange things. They take a boat going all the way to Europe.
Like we've been seeing people arriving in Greece and Italy and the drownings. And I think when this whole situation came to a head here was when the little 3-year-old boy was shown washed up on the shore. I think that's really what brought the whole refugee problem, at least here in America. You over there were experiencing it, but I think that hit the hearts of a lot of people here in America. And just looking at where the world's refugees come from, I'm looking at the Change Your Perception PDF that you'd sent me, and we have Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Iraq, and there's Colombia down there. And so obviously it's primarily Muslim countries or North African countries that these refugees are coming for. And again, just to recap the unsafe country, Yoella is saying that people are leaving out of literal fear for their life, maybe not necessarily, as I put it, for a hijra or an offensive immigration by Muslims. And you also differentiate safety from dangers imposed by a government versus natural disasters. I saw, because obviously you're going to have refugees from natural disasters. Even in a country like the United States, we might have regional refugees, like from Hurricane Katrina. A lot of people just left the New Orleans area. I'd like to transition at this point, Yoella, and this is the reason I had you on the show today, is I'd like to, you come up with a very, very important point. You judge, taking your method of the unsafe country, and you make the presumption that people are leaving these countries because of the unsafe conditions. And then you go to another tiny little country in that same area of the world, a country that the majority of the world abuses on a regular basis, the target of the majority of United Nations, not sanctions, but harsh criticisms, shall we say. And that nation is the only Jewish nation on earth, Israel. Tell us about Israel's refugee situation, Yoella.
Well, it can be very short because I think there are hardly any that will flee Israel because of an unsafe environment of, anybody can be there. If you're a Christian, if you're homosexual, whatever, nobody is going after you. So it's relatively safe. Israel does really a lot to protect their inhabitants. And, we can't even say about Israel that it's not in danger because it is in danger. It's every time in danger. But, the government does really a good job, to protect its inhabitants. And so on the list of unsafe countries, Israel is very, very low.
You mean there's not Jews fleeing Israel for their safety?
Well,
Of course not. We all know that's not the case. But that leads us to another situation, and that is the situation of Europe. And Europe might have an influx of Muslim refugees coming in right now, predominantly Muslim refugees coming in, but Europe is creating their own refugee problem, partially created. What I'm going to say, maybe not what you say, but Europe has its own little refugee problem, and I will link it to the massive influx of the Muslim population to Western Europe over the last decade or so. And tell us about Europe's refugee problem, if you would.
Well, I think one we can look all to the Middle East and all the refugees and from Africa that's coming in, and in Europe we are really want to take them in, and also take care of them. But we're forgetting, that the climate is changing in Europe, and Europe is creating their own refugees. There are increased amount of Jewish people that have to leave Europe.
What? Did you just say Europe's refugees are the Jews?
Exactly.
Exactly.
If we take the definition of the refugees and to feel unsafe, to feel threatened psychologically and physically, this is really an increase, upon the Jewish population within Europe. It's not just free aliyah they are going to make. They are pressurized, to flee Europe. And there is hardly any attention, on this major problem. I find it a major problem, and I think Europe cannot protect its inhabitants, its Jewish inhabitants, and I think it's a shame, a really big shame, considering the past, upon Europe. It can't give the Jewish population a safe habitat.
Well, this is where, Yoella, this is where I say the recent uptick in the anti-Semitism in Europe, which anti-Semitic crimes and abuses are absolutely on the rise, I attribute directly to the influx of Muslim refugees into Europe, and maybe not refugees, but just Muslim immigrants over the last 10 to 20 years. Islamic anti-Semitism is part and parcel of their culture. And as we've seen in France, Germany, Britain, Sweden, your country, and the Netherlands, we've seen anti-Semitic attacks by these Muslim immigrants in some communities where Jews can't even walk around with the kippah on anymore. I've had families tell me that they tell their children not to speak in Hebrew on the streets for fear of being physically attacked by Muslims. And all you have to do is look at the numbers. France in particular, which has, I believe, Europe's largest Jewish community, how long that lasts is in question, because they are leaving and moving to Israel in droves because of what you are saying is essentially the unsafe country theory.
Exactly. So, I mean, there is a contradiction going on. We take in refugees because of their unsafe countries. But on the other hand, the Jewish people are fleeing because of the unsafe climate for them in Europe. But coming back, on the unsafety of Israel, there is none, of the unsafety if we take the measure of unsafety country to its inhabitants. But the world seems to think they have to attack Israel, with this BDS. And when you see they are on the list very, very low on unsafe countries, you really wonder why, what's going on.
Listen,
there is something really strange going on.
Yeah, here's how bad Israel is. The quote Palestinian people, if you were to go to an average Arab Israeli and ask them, would they rather live their lives as an Israeli citizen or a citizen of a future Palestinian state? If they answered honestly, and not for fear of what Hamas or the Palestinian Authority might do to them, if they answered honestly, 99 out of 100 of them would prefer to be Israeli citizens, because the fact of the matter is, Muslims living in Israel have more rights in Israel than they do in the majority of the 56 Muslim countries in the world. That's right. Muslims living in Israel have more basic rights than Muslims living in the other 56 Muslim countries around the world. How bad are they, Yoella? How bad can the country be?
Yeah, I read a poll that I think Martin Sherman wrote it in one of his columns, like "Let my people go." It was
the
also
great
about
Martin Sherman.
Yeah, I think it was about 25% of the people in Samaria, West Bank, Judea that wanted to leave. 25% is a huge amount, and 50% of the Gazatian people want to leave. And I think, if they had the opportunity to go, that would be really on top on the unsafe list.
Right. Look at would you want to live under the rule of Hamas? I mean, think about what goes on there. I mean, you're constantly living in fear. They kill their own. They kill their brothers that are just members of the opposition party, Fatah. Who wants to live like that? You might have the left and the right political parties fighting within Israel, but you don't have them throwing them off of buildings and dragging them down the streets behind motorcycles like we witnessed in Gaza in 2007.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yes, what I want to make clear is that if we look at the list of unsafe countries, Israel is not there. Palestine is there. If we let them go, they will be there. The BDS, based on the attitude of let's say criminals, criminal governments, does not apply at all to Israel. And so I really, really like to know, what is behind the BDS. If it's just plain anti-Semitism, or, well.
Of course it is. The BDS movement is clearly based off of anti-Semitism, because the fact of the matter is the BDS movement hurts those Arab Israelis that are working in those factories. That's the fact of the matter. What these groups around the world are doing, the Code Pinks, the university groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, they are hurting the people that they are supposedly on the side of. It's only based of anti-Semitism. And Europe, we see how Europe, right before the Paris attacks, a week and a half before the Paris attacks, voted to label Israeli products in an attempt to basically help enforce the BDS movement. Well, we see how the Muslim community really respects those Western European countries by rolling out massive slaughters. I don't know if this is a phrase common in Europe or in the Netherlands, but it's called feeding the crocodile, hoping to be eaten last. And essentially what these hard lefters, the Code Pinks and the other ultra left-wing groups are doing by accommodating the anti-Semitism of the Islamists and the Muslims, they're basically feeding the crocodile, hoping to be eaten last. But they can rest assured that they will certainly be eaten.
Yeah, but let me add just one thing, because if we can prove, I don't know how, but that the BDS is basically based on anti-Semitism, because it's not really a pro-Palestine movement in core, because there is no base for it, then it's a criminal organization.
Yoella, I hate to tell you this, but half of the world is run by a criminal organization right now. It's called our governments. Okay, Yoella Wells, thank you very much for coming on the show today and going over the unsafe country theory of refugee creation and comparing the opposite of the unsafe country, which would be the great state of Israel. Yoella, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.